32OF, sat on a leather chair that felt too big for me. The air in the lawyer's office was thick and smelled like old paper and lemon polish. It was the kind of quiet that feels loud, pressing in on you. My brother, Mark, 35M, sat across from me. He was not looking at me. He was looking at the lawyer, Mr. Henderson, with an expression of polite, rehearsed grief. I knew it was rehearsed because I had seen him practice it in the mirror before our father's funeral 10 years ago. He was better at it now. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat. He was a man made of straight lines and gray colors. His suit was gray, his hair was gray, his eyes were a pale, washed-out gray. He held a thick document in his hands, the last will and testament of my mother, Eleanor. I felt a familiar knot tighten in my stomach. It was a knot I had lived with for as long as I could remember, the knot of waiting for the other shoe to drop. With my mother, a shoe was always about to drop. "We are gathered to read the final wishes of Eleanor Vance," Mr. Henderson said, his voice as dry as the papers he held. "She has made her intentions very clear." Mark nodded slowly, a somber look on his face. He reached over and patted my hand. His touch was cold and condescending. "It's okay, Clara. Mom loved us both. Whatever she decided, it was for the best." I pulled my hand away. His words were for the lawyer, not for me. They were part of the show. The show where he was the good son, the grieving son, the son who deserved everything. And I was the difficult daughter, the disappointment, the one who never quite measured up. My mother had made that clear my whole life. She did it with sharp words and long silences. She did it by celebrating Mark's smallest achievements while ignoring my biggest ones. She did it by always taking his side. I braced myself. I knew what was coming. Mark would get the house, the savings, the investments. He would get everything. I expected nothing. Expecting nothing was the safest way to live in my family. It was the only way to avoid the constant sting of disappointment. Maybe she would leave me a piece of jewelry I never wore, or a set of dishes I didn't want. A token to keep up appearances. Mr. Henderson adjusted his glasses and began to read. The legal language washed over me. Words like testator and bequeath and residue of my estate. I watched Mark. He was leaning forward slightly, his mask of grief slipping into one of keen interest. He was picturing his future, a future built on our mother's money, a future he felt he was owed. Then came the part I was waiting for, the part where my name was mentioned. "To my daughter, Clara Vance," Mr. Henderson read, his voice unwavering. "I leave the sum of $10. I stared at the polished surface of the table. $10. Not a piece of jewelry. Not a set of dishes. $10. It was so specific. It was so small. It was so perfectly, exquisitely cruel. It was a slap in the face from beyond the grave. A final declaration of my worth to her. I felt a hot flush of shame creep up my neck. I could feel Mark's eyes on me. I refused to look at him. I would not give him the satisfaction of seeing me cry. Then I heard it. A small sound. A snort. He was trying to hide a laugh, but he wasn't trying very hard. He disguised it as a cough, but I knew. I knew he was smirking. That smug, triumphant smirk that he had worn his whole life. The smirk that said, "I won. I always win." I kept my eyes on the table. The wood grain swirled in intricate patterns. I focused on a small knot in the wood, a dark little imperfection. I felt like that knot. Small and dark and out of place. I did not need to see his face. I could feel his victory. It filled the small office, sucking all the air out. $10. She had gone to the trouble of putting that in her will. A final, public humiliation. I felt Mr. Henderson's gaze on me. He was waiting for a reaction. I gave him none. I just sat there, frozen, staring at the table. My silence seemed to make Mark bolder. His smirk was probably a full-blown smile now. He had gotten everything he ever wanted. He had been crowned the winner of our mother's affection once and for all. The will was the final proof. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat again, a little louder this time. He continued to read from the document. I barely listened. My mind was ringing with the two words, $10. "And to my son, Mark Vance," the lawyer said, and I felt Mark sit up even straighter, puffing out his chest. This was his moment. The grand prize. The validation of a lifetime of being the favorite. Mr. Henderson paused. The silence stretched. It was a different kind of silence now. It was heavier, tense. Then he spoke the next words, the words that changed everything. "To my son, Mark Vance," he repeated slowly. "I also leave the sum of $10. The smirk vanished from my brother's face. I know because the triumphant energy in the room just evaporated. It was sucked into a black hole. I finally lifted my head. I looked at Mark. His mouth was hanging open slightly. His eyes were wide with disbelief. The practiced grief, the smug certainty, all of it was gone. He looked like a little boy who had just been told Santa Claus was not real. "What?" Mark stammered. He looked from the lawyer to me, then back to the lawyer. "What did you just say?" "I will read it again," Mr. Henderson said, his tone perfectly flat. "To my son, Mark Vance, I also leave the sum of $10. Mark shook his head. "No, that's not right. That's a mistake. There must be another page. Read the rest of it." His voice was rising, cracking with panic. "I am reading the will as it was written and signed by your mother, Mr. Vance," the lawyer replied calmly. He did not seem surprised by the outburst. He had probably seen it all before. "But the house," Mark said, his voice desperate. "The investments. Everything. Where is it? Who gets it?" I was just as confused, but for a different reason. My mother disowning me felt normal. It was the logical conclusion to our relationship. But Mark? She adored Mark. She worshipped him. She had sacrificed her own happiness for his, over and over again. She had paid his debts, cleaned up his messes, and defended his worst behavior. Leaving him $10 made no sense. It was impossible. It was like the sun rising in the west. Mr. Henderson turned a page. "Regarding the remainder of the estate," he read, "including the property at 123 Oak Street, all financial accounts, stocks, bonds, and personal effects, Eleanor Vance has decreed the following." Mark leaned forward, his hands gripping the edge of the table. His knuckles were white. He was still hoping, still believing there was a mistake, a clause that would fix this. "The entire residue of my estate," Mr. Henderson continued, "is to be liquidated. The total sum is to be donated in its entirety to the St. Jude Children's Research Hospital." Silence. It was a profound, deafening silence. Mark just stared. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. All the color had drained from it. He looked sick. A children's hospital. My mother had never shown the slightest interest in charity. She complained about writing a $20 check for the church bake sale. She thought all charities were scams. Donating her entire fortune to one was the most out-of-character thing I could possibly imagine. "No," Mark whispered. It was a raw, broken sound. "No, she wouldn't. She promised me. She promised me the house." "The will is legally binding, Mr. Vance," the lawyer said. "It was signed by your mother in the presence of two witnesses. She was of sound mind and body at the time of signing." "Sound mind?" Mark shouted, slamming his hand on the table. The sound echoed in the quiet room. "She was sick. She was confused. She didn't know what she was doing. You people took advantage of her." He pointed a shaking finger at Mr. Henderson. "Your mother approached our firm on her own accord," Mr. Henderson said, his voice still calm, but with a new edge of steel in it. "We have medical assessments confirming her capacity at the time of the signing. This will is ironclad." Mark slumped back in his chair. He looked completely deflated. The confident, arrogant brother I had known my whole life was gone. In his place was a pale, trembling man who had just lost everything. I should have felt something. Joy, vindication, a sense of justice. But I didn't. I just felt empty, numb. This wasn't a victory for me. My mother hadn't chosen me over him. She had rejected us both. She had thrown us both away with equal disdain. We were each worth $10 to her. In the end, we were the same. The meeting ended quickly after that. Mark was in no condition to speak. He just sat there, staring into space. I signed some papers that Mr. Henderson put in front of me. He handed me an envelope. I knew what was inside. A crisp $10 bill. A final insult. I stood up to leave. Mark didn't move. "Mark?" I said softly. He didn't look at me. He just spoke to the empty air in front of him. "She promised me," he said again, his voice hollow. "All my life, she promised me." I walked out of the office and into the bright afternoon sun. The world felt strange, tilted on its axis. Nothing made sense. I held the envelope in my hand. It felt heavier than $10. It felt like the weight of a life full of questions that had no answers. Why would she do it? Why would she throw away the one person she claimed to love? Something was wrong. This wasn't just about cruelty. This was about something else. And for the first time in my life, I felt a flicker of something other than resignation. I felt curiosity. I needed to know why. The drive home was a blur. I kept replaying the scene in the lawyer's office over and over in my head. The shock on Mark's face. The cold finality in Mr. Henderson's voice. The idea of my mother's entire estate. The house I grew up in. The money she hoarded so carefully. All of it going to a charity she had never once mentioned. It was a puzzle, and none of the pieces fit. When I got to my small apartment, I tossed my keys on the counter and slumped onto the sofa. The envelope was still in my hand. I opened it. Inside, as expected, was a single $10 bill. It was new and crisp, as if it had come straight from the bank. I stared at George Washington's face. He looked unimpressed. I couldn't blame him. My phone buzzed. It was Mark. I ignored it. It buzzed again. And again. On the fifth call, I answered, putting it on speaker. "What is your problem?" I asked, my voice tired. "My problem?" he yelled, his voice distorted with rage. "My problem is that our mother's entire life savings are being stolen, and you're just sitting there doing nothing." "What am I supposed to do, Mark?" I said. The lawyer said it's ironclad. "Lawyers say things," he shot back. "We have to fight this, Clara. We have to contest the will. She was obviously manipulated. Someone got to her. A nurse, a doctor, one of those charity people. They prey on old, sick women." I thought about it. It was a plausible explanation. Our mother had been ill for the last year of her life. She had caregivers coming and going. Maybe one of them had filled her head with ideas, but it still didn't feel right. My mother was many things, but she was not easily manipulated. She was stubborn and suspicious to a fault. She barely trusted her own family, let alone a stranger. "I don't know, Mark," I said. "What do you mean you don't know?" he demanded. "This is our inheritance, our birthright. She wanted me, us, to have the house. She told me 1,000 times. You were there. You heard her." I had heard her. I had heard her promise Mark the house since we were children. It was always Mark's house. When I moved out for college, my bedroom immediately became Mark's office. When he needed money for a down payment on his own place, she gave it to him, saying, "You'll have this place soon enough anyway. You might as well get used to managing property." It was always his. "This is your fault, you know." He suddenly snarled. I blinked. "My fault? How is this my fault?" "You were always so difficult," he said, his voice dripping with old resentment. "You upset her. You stressed her out. In her final days, you probably said something that made her snap. You pushed her into this. You were always jealous of me. of my relationship with her. The accusation was so absurd, so perfectly in character for him, that I almost laughed. I barely saw her in her final days, Mark. You made sure of that. You told me my visits were agitating her. Because they were, he insisted. You'd come over with your long face and your sad stories, and it would take her days to recover. I was the one there for her. I was the one holding her hand. I was the one taking care of everything. I took a deep breath. This was pointless. Arguing with Mark was like arguing with a brick wall. A brick wall that blamed you for being in its way. Look, Mark, I said, trying to keep my voice even. I'm tired. I don't want to fight. Of course you don't, he scoffed. You don't care. $10, $1,000,000, it's all the same to you, isn't it? You never appreciated what this family had. Well, I do. And I'm not going to let some scam artist steal it. I'm hiring a lawyer. A real lawyer, not some paper pusher like Henderson. And you're going to help me. No, I said. The word came out before I even thought about it. What did you say? He asked, his voice dangerously quiet. I said no, I repeated, a little stronger this time. I'm not getting involved, Mark. This is your fight. You do what you want. You ungrateful, he started, but I hung up. I couldn't listen to any more. I sat in the silence of my apartment, my heart pounding. Saying no to Mark was a foreign concept. My entire life had been structured around placating him, staying out of his way, and absorbing his anger to keep the peace. But something had shifted. The $10 bill on my coffee table wasn't just an insult. It was a release. If my mother valued me at $10, then I owed her, and by extension Mark, nothing. I was free. But the question still lingered. Why? It wasn't enough to just walk away. The story didn't make sense. And if I didn't understand the story, I felt like I would be haunted by it forever. A few days passed. Mark left a dozen angry voicemails. Each one was more frantic than the last. He had hired a lawyer. He was building a case. He accused me of conspiring with the hospital. He accused me of hiding a secret. Later will. He was flailing, throwing accusations in every direction, hoping one would stick. I deleted them all without listening to the end. I tried to go back to my normal life, my job as a graphic designer, my quiet evenings with a book. But my mother's final act was a splinter in my mind. I couldn't get it out. I decided to call my Aunt Carol. She was my mother's younger sister. She had always been firmly in Mark's corner, viewing him as the charming, successful nephew and me as the strange, moody niece. But she also loved to gossip. If anyone knew anything about my mother's last few months, it would be her. Clara, dear, she said when she answered, her voice syrupy sweet. I was so sorry to hear about the will. It's just a tragedy. Your poor brother is beside himself. I'm sure he is, I said dryly. Aunt Carol, I was wondering if you spoke to Mom much before? You know? Oh, all the time, dear, she said. We were very close. I tried to visit every week, though it was difficult, of course. Mark was so protective of her, and rightly so. He didn't want her getting overtired. Right, I said. Did she seem different to you in her last few months? There was a pause. Well, Aunt Carol said, lowering her voice conspiratorially. She was a bit confused, muddled. She would forget things, and she became very secretive. She had this old wooden box she kept by her bed. She wouldn't let anyone touch it, not even Mark. He said she'd get terribly agitated if he even went near it. A box. That was interesting. Did you ever see what was in it? I asked. Goodness, no, she said, sounding scandalized. I wouldn't dream of prying. But Mark was worried. He thought one of the nurses might have given her something to hide in there. You know, to manipulate her. He is convinced this whole will business is because of that nurse. The young one. What was her name? Maria. So Mark thinks a nurse manipulated her? I asked, keeping my tone neutral. He's certain of it. Aunt Carol confirmed. And it makes sense, doesn't it? Your mother would never, ever have left her money to anyone but Mark. He was her whole world. For her to do this, she couldn't have been in her right mind. It's the only explanation. It was the explanation they had settled on. The one that allowed Mark to remain the perfect son and my mother to remain the doting mother. The one that painted them both as victims of a predator. It was a neat, simple story, but I didn't believe it. Thank you, Aunt Carol, I said. That's very helpful. Of course, dear, she said. And listen, you should really call your brother. He needs your support. You two should be a united front on this. It's what your mother would have wanted. I hung up without responding. What my mother would have wanted was now the biggest mystery in the world. A secret box. The idea took root in my mind. My mother's house was now the property of the estate. Technically, I had no right to be there. But the keys were still in a drawer in my kitchen. She had given me a spare set years ago, in a rare moment of maternal foresight. I hadn't used them in years. Mark had his own set and had made it clear that I should always call before coming over. I looked at the $10 bill on my coffee table. Then I looked at the keys in the drawer. I had a choice. I could let it go. I could accept the $10 and the freedom it represented and walk away from the whole mess. Or I could go looking for answers. I could try to understand the last act of a woman I had never really understood at all. For 32 years, I had chosen the path of least resistance. I had avoided confrontation. I had let things go. But this was different. This wasn't just about the money. It was about the truth. And for the first time, I felt a desperate need to find it. That evening, I drove to my mother's house. It was a quiet suburban street, lined with oak trees and neat lawns. The house looked the same as it always had. A 2-story colonial with dark green shutters. It looked peaceful. But I knew that inside those walls, peace had always been a rare commodity. I parked down the street and watched the house for a few minutes. I felt like a criminal, sneaking into my own childhood home. But I knew Mark wouldn't be there. He was probably at his lawyer's office, plotting his strategy. My hand was trembling as I put the key in the lock. It turned easily. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The air was still and stale. It smelled like my mother. A mixture of rose-scented potpourri and antiseptic cleaner. The house was tidy, almost unnervingly so. Mark had likely hired a cleaning service after the funeral. The furniture was covered in white sheets, making the rooms look like a gallery of ghosts. I walked through the silent living room, my footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors. I went past the dining room where we'd had so many tense family dinners. I went up the stairs. Her bedroom was at the end of the hall. The door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open and stepped inside. This room was just as neat as the others. The bed was perfectly made. The vanity was clear of all her usual clutter of pill bottles and half-empty water glasses. It felt sterile, like a hotel room. I looked around. Where would she hide a box? I checked under the bed. Nothing. I opened the closet. It was filled with her clothes, all neatly hung and organized by color. I ran my hands along the shelves, behind the stacks of sweaters. Nothing. I thought about what Aunt Carol had said. She kept it by her bed. I looked at the nightstand. It was a simple, heavy oak table with one drawer. I pulled the drawer open. It was empty except for a well-worn Bible and a pair of reading glasses. I felt a surge of frustration. Maybe Aunt Carol was wrong. Maybe Mark had already found the box and taken it. Of course he would have. He was the one who was here all the time. He probably searched the entire house the day she died. I was about to give up and leave when my eyes caught something. A faint scratch on the hardwood floor, right next to the leg of the nightstand. It looked fresh. I knelt down for a closer look. The nightstand was heavy. It wouldn't move easily. But the scratch suggested it had been moved recently. I put my hands on the sides of the table and pushed. It was heavy, but it scraped against the floor, moving a few inches. And there, underneath where it had been sitting, was a single loose floorboard. The edges were slightly splintered, as if it had been pried up many times. My heart started to beat faster. I used my fingernails to work at the edge of the board. It was wedged in tight. I went to the kitchen and came back with a butter knife. I slipped the tip of the knife into the crack and gently pried. The board lifted up with a soft groan. And there it was. It was a simple wooden box, about the size of a shoebox, with a tarnished brass latch. It looked old. I lifted it out of the dusty space. It was heavier than I expected. I sat down on the floor, my back against the sheet-covered bed, and I put the box in my lap. For a moment, I just looked at it. This was her secret. The one she protected from everyone, even Mark. I felt a strange mix of excitement and dread. What if what was inside was worse than what I imagined? What if it just confirmed everything I already believed, that she was a cold, cruel woman who found one last way to hurt her children? I took a breath and I lifted the latch. It was stiff, but it clicked open. I slowly lifted the lid. The box was full. It was packed with yellowed letters tied in faded ribbon, old photographs with curled edges, and tucked in the very middle, a small, leather-bound journal. I picked up the journal first. The leather was soft and worn. There was no name on it, no date. I opened it to the first page. The handwriting was my mother's, but it was different from the shaky script of her later years. This was the writing of a young woman, confident and clear. The first entry was dated 50 years ago. She was a teenager. I started to read, and the woman I thought I knew began to disappear. I sat on the floor of my mother's bedroom for hours, reading the journal. The sun went down, and the room grew dark, but I didn't notice. I was completely lost in another world, another time. The world of a young woman named Eleanor who was not yet my mother. The journal told a story I had never heard. She wrote of a strict, unloving home. She wrote of a desperate desire to escape her small town. And she wrote about a boy. His name was Michael. He was not my father. She wrote about him with a passion and a tenderness I had never seen from her. They were in love. They had planned to run away together. But her parents forbade it. They thought he was beneath her. He came from a poor family with no prospects. They did everything they could to keep them apart. Then there was a gap in the entries. Several months were missing. When the journal started again, the tone was different. It was broken, devastated. Michael was gone. He had left town without a word. She was heartbroken. And she was pregnant. My breath caught in my throat. I read the next few pages with a growing sense of dread. Her parents were furious. They sent her away to a home for unwed mothers. The shame, the isolation, she described it all in stark, painful detail. She gave birth to a baby boy, and her parents forced her to give him up for adoption. They told her it was the only way to save her from a life of ruin. They told her she would forget. She never saw her son again. The journal ended a few months after that. The last entry was short and full of despair. "They took him," she wrote. "They took my baby, and they took my heart. I will never be whole again." I closed the journal. My hands were shaking. A brother. I had another brother. A secret, older brother. My mother had a whole life, a whole tragedy that she had buried completely. I understood now. The coldness, the distance, the inability to connect with me or even, in some ways, with Mark. She was a woman who had her heart broken and her child stolen. She had built a fortress around herself, and she never let anyone in. Not really. I put the journal aside and looked at the rest of the contents of the box. There were letters, dozens of them. I picked up one of the bundles. They were from Michael. They were love letters, full of promises and dreams for their future together. But then I noticed something. The postmarks on the last few letters were from after she said he had disappeared. He hadn't left her. He had been writing to her. But she had never gotten the letters. Her parents must have hidden them from her. My anger at my mother began to shift into a profound sadness. Her whole life had been built on a foundation of lies. lies told by her own parents. They had destroyed her first love and taken her first child. I dug deeper into the box. Underneath the letters were more recent documents, bank statements, legal papers, and another set of letters, these in my mother's shaky, elderly handwriting. They were drafts, unsent letters. They were addressed to Mark. I started to read them, and the sick, cold feeling returned to my stomach. These were not letters of a doting mother. They were full of rage and disappointment. "You take and you take," one letter began. "You think you are entitled to everything I have. You think my money is your money. You hover over me like a vulture, waiting for me to die." Another one detailed a conversation she had overheard between Mark and his wife, Susan. They were complaining about having to visit her. They were talking about her money, making plans for it. "Susan wants to redo the kitchen," my mother wrote. "She said she can't wait to get rid of my old ugly things. You didn't defend me, you just laughed." The letters painted a dark picture of Mark's behavior in her final years. He wasn't the caring, attentive son he pretended to be. He was greedy. He was impatient. He was cruel. He had isolated her from me, not to protect her health, but to have more control over her and her finances. And then I found the bank statements. There were dozens of them from the last 2 years, and they had notes scribbled in the margins in my mother's hand. "Where did this money go?" she had written next to a large withdrawal. "I did not approve this transfer. Mark said this was for a safe investment." It was all there, clear as day. Mark had been stealing from her, systematically, for years. He had been siphoning money out of her accounts, convincing her to sign documents she didn't understand, taking advantage of her age and her illness. He wasn't waiting for his inheritance. He was taking it early. And she had found out. In her last few months, the fog of her illness must have cleared just enough for her to see the truth. She had started investigating. She had gathered the proof. This box wasn't just full of old memories. It was an indictment. At the very bottom of the box, I found one last thing, a single sealed envelope. On the front, in my mother's handwriting, it just said, "Clara." My fingers trembled as I opened it. It was a letter to me. "My dear Clara," it began. The words felt strange. She had never called me dear in my life. "If you are reading this, it means I am gone. And it means you were smart enough to look for answers, which is more than I can say for your brother. I am sorry for many things. I know I was not a good mother to you. I was broken a long time ago, and I never learned how to fix myself. I let my bitterness poison everything. I saw your strength, and it scared me. I saw your independence, and it felt like a judgment on my own life. I pushed you away because it was easier than facing my own failures. For that, I am truly sorry. Your brother is a different story. I created a monster. I spoiled him. I protected him. I gave him everything he ever asked for, hoping he would fill the hole in my heart. But he only made it bigger. He is greedy and weak, and he has the heart of a thief. He has taken and taken from me, and he thought I was too stupid or too sick to notice. He was wrong. I have left him $10 so that the world will know he is a disappointment. I have left you $10 so that you will be free. You do not have to carry the weight of this family, or this house, or this money. You are free to live your own life. I hope you will. The rest of it, all the money, it is going to a place that helps children. Maybe it can do some good. Maybe it can make up for some of the bad. There is one more thing you should know. I found him. Your brother. The one I lost. I hired a private investigator a year ago. His name is David. He lives in Oregon. He is a good man. He has a family. I have written to him. I have told him everything. I did not ask for his forgiveness. I do not deserve it. I just wanted him to know the truth. His contact information is in this box. What you do with it is up to you. Do not grieve for me, Clara. I have been a ghost for a long time. Live your life. Be happy. That is the only thing I ask. The letter fell from my hands. tears were streaming down my face. It was not a letter of love. Not really. It was a confession, an explanation, an apology of sorts. It was the most honest communication I had ever received from my mother. She had left me $10 to set me free, and she had left Mark $10 to punish him for his betrayal. The will wasn't an act of a confused old woman. It was the final, calculated move of a woman who had finally decided to fight back. It was an act of revenge, cold, precise, and devastating. I sat there in the dark for a long time, surrounded by the ghosts of my mother's past. I finally understood. I knew why she did it, and I knew what I had to do next. Mark wasn't just going to lose his inheritance. He was going to be exposed for the thief he was. The next morning, I called Mr. Henderson. I told him I had found some documents belonging to my mother, and I needed to see him. He agreed to meet me that afternoon. I spent the morning carefully photocopying every single page from the box. The journal, the letters, the bank statements, and my mother's final letter to me. I put the original documents back in the box, resealed it, and hid it securely. The copies I placed in a large manila envelope. Walking into Mr. Henderson's office for the second time felt different. I was no longer the grieving, numb daughter. I was something else. I had a purpose. "Miss Vance," he said, gesturing for me to sit. "You said you found some documents." "I did," I said. I placed the thick envelope on his desk. "I think you need to see these. They belong to my mother. I found them hidden in her house." He put on his reading glasses and opened the envelope. He started with the bank statements, his eyes scanning the pages and my mother's handwritten notes. His expression remained neutral, but I saw a muscle twitch in his jaw. He spent a long time looking at them, comparing the dates of the transfers with the notes. Then he read the drafts of the letters to Mark. He read them slowly, his face grim. Finally, he read the copy of the letter she had left for me. When he was finished, he took off his glasses and looked at me. "This is quite something," he said, his voice quiet. "Is it enough?" I asked. "To stop Mark's lawsuit?" "Miss Vance," he said, leaning forward, "this is more than enough to stop his lawsuit. These documents, especially the annotated bank statements, constitute substantial evidence of financial elder abuse. If your brother proceeds with his attempt to contest the will on the grounds of your mother's incapacity, this evidence will not only cause his case to be dismissed, it could very well lead to a criminal investigation against him." A shiver went down my spine. A criminal investigation. I hadn't even thought that far ahead. I had just wanted to protect my mother's final wishes. "What happens now?" I asked. "Your brother's lawyer has already filed the initial paperwork to challenge the will," Mr. Henderson explained. "A preliminary hearing is scheduled. We will present this evidence to the court. But first, we present it to them. It is likely they will withdraw their challenge immediately once they see what we have." "He won't," I said. "Mark won't back down. He's too arrogant. He'll say I forged them." Mr. Henderson gave me a thin smile. "That will be difficult for him to prove. Your mother's handwriting can be authenticated. The bank transfers can be traced. Digital records exist for these transactions showing where the money went. It will almost certainly lead directly to your brother's accounts or to businesses affiliated with him. He would be very, very foolish to claim these are forgeries." He was right. Mark was arrogant. But he wasn't stupid. Not when it came to self-preservation. "There is another matter," Mr. Henderson said, tapping the copy of the journal. "The existence of another child. The adoption records would be sealed, but this journal is a compelling piece of personal history. It provides the context for your mother's state of mind. It explains why she might choose to donate her estate to a children's hospital. It paints a picture of a woman seeking a form of atonement. This will be very powerful in court, should it come to that." I nodded slowly, processing everything. The box contained the entire story. The tragedy, the betrayal, and the final brutal justice. "I want you to handle this, Mr. Henderson," I said. I want you to show this to Mark's lawyer. I want them to know exactly what we have. I will contact them this afternoon, he said. I expect you will hear from your brother shortly after. He was right. My phone rang less than 3 hours later. It was Mark. His voice was no longer angry. It was cold with fury. What did you do? He hissed. I did what Mom wanted, I said calmly. I found what she left behind. You think you're so clever, don't you? He sneered. Finding her little diary and some fake bank statements. You won't get away with this, Clara. I'll prove you forged everything. So, he was going with that defense. Mr. Henderson was right about him being foolish. Good luck with that, Mark, I said. The bank has records. Handwriting experts exist. You're cornered and you know it. You did this to me, he yelled, his voice cracking. You were always jealous. You couldn't stand that she loved me more. You poisoned her against me. No, Mark, I said, and my voice was as steady as stone. You did this to yourself. She saw who you were. She finally saw it. All those years, she thought you were a prince. But at the end, she realized you were just a thief. A common, greedy thief. There was a strangled sound on the other end of the line. For a moment, I thought he was going to explode. But instead, his voice dropped to a desperate whisper. Please, Clara, don't do this. Don't show them those papers. We can make a deal. We'll split the estate. 50-50. Just like it should have been. We'll tell the lawyers we worked it out. I was stunned. After all the accusations, all the anger, he was trying to bribe me. He was admitting the evidence was real. He was admitting his guilt. 50-50? I said, my voice dripping with disbelief. You mean 50% for you, 50 for me, and 0 for the charity our mother wanted the money to go to? Who cares about the charity? He said impatiently. This is our money, our family's money. Don't throw it all away just to spite me. The sheer audacity of it left me speechless. He didn't feel remorse. He didn't feel shame. He just felt the terror of being caught. And his first instinct was to try and cut a deal, to buy my silence. It's not about spiting you, Mark, I said, my voice cold. It's about honoring her last wish. She didn't want you to have the money. She found out what you were doing. This was her way of stopping you. She was a sick old woman who didn't know what she was doing. He screamed. She knew exactly what she was doing, I replied, and so do I. I ended the call. I knew then that this would go all the way. He was not going to back down. He would try to lie and bluster his way through it because that was all he knew how to do. He would try to destroy my reputation to save his own skin. I sat with that knowledge for a while. The old Clara would have been terrified. She would have caved. She would have taken the deal just to make the conflict go away. But the old Clara was gone. My mother's letter had changed me. She had left me $10 to be free, and being free meant not being afraid of my brother anymore. It meant standing up for the truth, no matter how ugly it was. I thought about the other information in the box. The name and address of my other brother, David. Part of me was desperate to reach out to him, to connect with this missing piece of my family. But another part of me was hesitant. His life was his own. Did I have the right to disrupt it with the story of a mother who had given him away? I decided to wait. I would deal with Mark first. I would see my mother's final wish through to the end. And then, when the dust settled, I would think about David. One battle at a time. The first battle was for my mother's legacy. The second would be for my own future. The meeting was set for a week later. It wasn't a court hearing, but a formal mediation session. Mark and his lawyer, a man named Mr. Davies, would be there. Mr. Henderson and I would be there. A neutral mediator would preside. The goal was to see if a resolution could be reached before this went to a public and potentially messy court battle. The night before the meeting, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Mark's face, the smugness in the lawyer's office, the rage on the phone. I knew he would be hostile. He would try to intimidate me, to paint me as a liar and a manipulator. I had to be ready. I called my friend, Sarah. She was the only person I had told the whole story to, from the will reading to the discovery of the box. "How are you feeling?" she asked, her voice warm and steady. "Like I'm about to walk into a lion's den," I admitted. "You have the truth on your side, Clara," she said. "And you have proof. All you have to do is stay calm and let the evidence speak for itself. He's the one who should be terrified, not you." "I know," I said, "but he's my brother. It feels awful, exposing him like this." "He stopped being your brother in any real sense a long time ago," Sarah said gently. "He was your bully, your tormentor, and he was a thief who stole from his own sick mother. Don't you dare feel guilty for holding him accountable. You're not doing this to him. You're doing this for your mom and for yourself." Her words helped. She was right. This wasn't an act of aggression. It was an act of defense. I was defending my mother's memory and her final, clear-eyed decision. The next day, I walked into the conference room with Mr. Henderson by my side. Mark and Mr. Davies were already there. Mark was wearing an expensive suit and a look of deep indignation. He refused to meet my eyes. He just stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched. The mediator, a calm woman in her 50s, introduced herself and laid out the rules. Each side would have a chance to state their position. Mr. Davies went first. He spoke in a smooth, confident voice. He painted a picture of Eleanor Vance as a frail, confused woman in her final days. He spoke of her deep, lifelong love for her son, Mark, who had been her primary caregiver and sole source of comfort. He suggested that she had been subjected to undue influence by an outside party, likely a healthcare worker with ties to the charitable organization named in the will. He argued that the will was a complete departure from her previously stated intentions and therefore should be considered invalid. It was a good performance. If I hadn't found the box, I might have even believed him. Then it was Mr. Henderson's turn. "My client, Miss Clara Vance, does not dispute that her mother's will represents a significant change of heart," he began, his voice calm and measured. "However, we have evidence that this change was not the result of confusion or undue influence. On the contrary, it was the result of a moment of terrible clarity. We have evidence that in the final months of her life, Eleanor Vance discovered that her son, Mr. Mark Vance, the man she had entrusted with her care and her finances, had been systematically defrauding her." Mark shot out of his chair. "That's a lie," he shouted, pointing at me. "She's making it all up. She forged those documents." "Mr. Vance, please sit down," the mediator said firmly. Mark ignored her. "My mother loved me. She would never have believed these lies." Mr. Henderson waited for him to finish. He did not raise his voice. He simply placed a single photocopied page on the table. It was one of the bank statements. "Is this your mother's handwriting, Mr. Vance?" he asked, pointing to a note in the margin. The note said, "Mark said this was for roof repairs. The roofer said he was never paid." Mark stared at the paper. His face went pale. I don't know. Her handwriting was shaky at the end." Mr. Henderson placed another page on the table. It was a copy of a transfer slip for $50,000. The money had been moved from Eleanor's savings account to a numbered company. "This company," Mr. Henderson said calmly, "our forensic accountant traced its ownership. It belongs to you, Mr. Vance. Can you explain what service you provided your mother that was worth $50,000? Mark opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at his lawyer, his eyes wide with panic. Mr. Davies looked just as shaken. He clearly hadn't been prepared for this level of specific, documented proof. "My client was managing his mother's finances," Mr. Davies said, trying to recover. "There may have been some commingling of funds. Mistakes were made, perhaps, but it was not malicious. Was it also a mistake when you told your mother you needed $10,000 for her medical bills, but the money was actually used as a down payment on a boat?" Mr. Henderson continued, his voice relentless. "We have the bank transfer. And we have the receipt for the boat. They are dated on the same day. He laid down another piece of paper, and another, and another. Each one was a piece of the puzzle, a withdrawal, a transfer, a lie. The pile of evidence grew in the center of the table. It was a monument to Mark's greed. Mark had sunk back into his chair. He was no longer shouting. He was just staring at the papers, his face ashen. He looked small, defeated. Finally, Mr. Henderson placed the copy of my mother's letter to me on the top of the pile. "And this," he said, "is a letter Eleanor Vance left for her daughter. In it, she explains everything: her discovery of the theft, her disappointment in her son, and her reasoning for the new will. She writes, and I quote, 'I have left him $10 so that the world will know he is a disappointment.'" He paused, letting the words hang in the silent room. She goes on to say, "He is greedy and weak, and he has the heart of a thief. Would you like me to continue reading, Mr. Vance?" Mark shook his head, not looking up. Mr. Davies cleared his throat. He looked at his client, then at Mr. Henderson. "Perhaps we could take a brief recess," he said, his voice strained. The mediator nodded. "We will take 15 minutes. Mr. Davies practically dragged Mark out of the room. Mr. Henderson and I sat in silence. I felt a strange sense of calm. Sarah was right. The evidence had spoken for itself. There was nothing Mark could say or do. "What do you think they're talking about?" I asked. "His lawyer," Mr. Henderson said, "is likely explaining the full extent of his legal jeopardy. He is explaining that if they proceed, this evidence becomes public record. He is explaining that the district attorney's office takes financial elder abuse very, very seriously. He is advising his client to withdraw the challenge immediately and to hope that we do not press for criminal charges." "Will we?" I asked. The thought made me feel queasy, despite everything. "That will be your decision," Mr. Henderson said. "The estate is the injured party. As the executor, the bank representing the charity could choose to file a complaint, but your opinion would carry significant weight." I didn't know how to answer that. Did I want to see my brother in jail? 20 minutes later, Mr. Davies returned to the room. He was alone. "My client has agreed to withdraw his challenge to the will," he said stiffly. His face was grim. He looked like a man who had just been handed a career-defining defeat. "We will file the necessary paperwork this afternoon." He didn't offer an apology. He didn't make any excuses. He just stated the fact. "And?" Mr. Henderson prompted. Mr. Davies sighed. "And my client understands that the evidence you have presented is compromising. He hopes that in the interest of family privacy, this matter can be concluded without involving other authorities." It was the closest he could come to begging. Mr. Henderson looked at me. It was my call. I thought about my mother. I thought about her letter. She hadn't asked me to send Mark to jail. She had just wanted to stop him. She had wanted to take away the prize he had coveted his whole life. Her will had already done that. The public humiliation he would suffer when the family found out he was getting nothing would be its own kind of prison. "No criminal charges," I said, my voice clear. "On one condition." "Mr. Y." Davies looked at me, surprised. "I want him to pay back the money," I said. "Every cent he stole from her. The estate is going to charity. Those children deserve to have that money. The money my mother intended for them." Mr. Henderson nodded, a look of approval in his eyes. Mr. Davies paled. "That is a significant sum." "He has a boat," I said flatly. "He can sell it." Mr. Davies left the room again. This time he was gone for a long time. When he came back, he looked exhausted. "He agrees," he said. "A repayment plan will be arranged between my client and the estate's executor." And just like that, it was over. Mark had lost. Completely and utterly. He had lost the house, the money, and the last shred of his dignity. He had been exposed as a liar and a thief. My mother's revenge was complete. I walked out of that building feeling lighter than I had in my entire life. The knot in my stomach was gone. For the first time, I felt truly free. The fallout was quiet but devastating for Mark. The news that he had challenged the will and then abruptly withdrawn his claim spread through the family. The official story, spun by Mark, was that he did it out of respect for his mother's bizarre final wishes. But no one really believed it. Aunt Carol called me, fishing for information. "I just don't understand, Clara," she said. "For him to just give up. It's not like him. Did something happen?" I was tired of the secrets and the lies that had defined my family for so long. I decided to tell her the truth. I didn't give her all the painful details of my mother's past, but I told her about the bank statements. I told her Mark had been stealing from our mother and that we had the proof. There was a long, shocked silence on the other end of the line. "Oh my," she finally whispered. "Oh my dear, I had no idea." "None of us did," I said. "Mom figured it out at the end, though." "That poor woman," Aunt Carol said, and for the first time I heard genuine sympathy in her voice. "And poor you, having to deal with all of this on your own." Her allegiance, so firmly planted in Mark's camp for 35 years, had crumbled in a single phone call. The truth had a way of doing that. I saw Mark one last time, a few weeks later. I had to go to the house to pick up a few personal items I had left there before the estate was formally handed over. I had arranged a time when I knew he wouldn't be there, but our schedules must have gotten crossed. He was in the living room, surrounded by boxes, his face a mask of bitter resentment. "Come to gloat?" he sneered. "No, Mark," I said tiredly. "I came to get my photo albums." He watched me as I pulled the heavy books off the shelf. He looked terrible. He had lost weight, and there were dark circles under his eyes. "You ruined my life," he said, his voice low and venomous. "You did that yourself," I replied, not looking at him. I just held up a mirror. "She loved me," he insisted, his voice cracking with a desperate, childish need to believe it. "Whatever those letters said, I know she loved me more than you." I stopped what I was doing and I looked at him. I saw him for what he was, not a monster. Just a weak, hollow man who had been told his whole life he was special, and who couldn't handle the reality that he wasn't. I didn't feel anger anymore. I just felt a deep, profound pity. "Maybe she did, Mark," I said softly. "But you know what? It doesn't matter anymore." I picked up my albums and I walked out of that house without looking back. I never spoke to him again. A few months later, I was sitting in my apartment and I saw the $10 bill I had left on my bookshelf. I took it down and looked at it. It was just a piece of paper, but it felt like a key. It had unlocked a lifetime of secrets and set me free. I put it in a small, simple frame and hung it on my wall. It was my declaration of independence. There was one last piece of the puzzle. David, my other brother. I had his contact information tucked away in a drawer. For months, I had been afraid to use it. Afraid of disrupting his life, of opening old wounds. But my mother's letter had given me more than just freedom from Mark. It had given me a family history I never knew I had. It gave me a brother. One sunny Saturday afternoon, I sat down and wrote him a letter. I told him who I was. I told him about our mother, about the journal, about her final letter. I didn't ask for anything. I just told him that if he ever wanted to know more, or if he ever wanted to talk, I was here. I sealed the envelope and I mailed it before I could lose my nerve. I didn't know if he would write back. I didn't know if I would ever meet him. But it felt like the right thing to do. It felt like the beginning of a new story, one that wasn't about secrets or betrayals. One that could, maybe, be about connection. My mother left me $10. It was meant to be an ending, a final, dismissive gesture. But she had miscalculated. It wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of my entire life.